I'm Leah Lane, an award-winning travel writer and author of Places I Remember, Tales, Truths, Delights from 100 Countries. On this podcast, we share conversations with travelers about fascinating destinations and memorable experiences around the world. In this episode, we're talking about America's national parks with Mona Messeru, an editor and an executive at Messeru Travel Public Relations. Mona estimates that she's gone to more than 75 national parks, monuments, memorials, historic sites, and other NPS or National Park Service units, often with her family. And many of them have worked in national parks. Welcome, Mona.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here, Leah.
You know, I saw the Ken Burns series, the PBS series about the national parks, and I remember that he called America's national parks America's best idea. And that really stuck with me because I think we take them for granted pretty much, but they weren't always there. Can you tell us a little history of our national parks?
I can tell you a little history about the parks, absolutely. And it all started in Yellowstone National Park, which next year has a very big celebration. It's going to turn 150 years old. It was established in 1872 after groups of explorers went out to the remote areas of Wyoming and found these weird geothermal features and things they'd never seen. And they brought back the word to Congress about this place that was so beautiful and so mesmerizing. And they convinced Congress through photographs and paintings that they should protect and preserve this spot far, far in the West. And that was the start of it all. So Yellowstone National Park was set aside in 1872.
And then I think in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson, signed the act, I guess, that created the National Park Service, and that started things going, right? Is that the moment where we sort of expanded from?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that is the moment that we expanded. The Yellowstone had been managed up until that point by the U.S. Army. As a matter of fact, you can still see some of the original buildings in an area that was called Fort Mammoth. It's in the northern part of the park, and so the Army managed the Park Service, that Yellowstone National Park at first, mostly just to catch poachers and that sort of thing.
I read that today there are more than 400 areas with more than 84 million acres in 50 states, the District of Columbia, Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and so forth. So we've come a long way, baby.
We certainly have.
I think you have a million ideas and thoughts about parks, but I thought perhaps I will give some idea of some of the parks I've been to. I wanted to just give brief word images of some of the wonderful experiences I've had at some of the parks. I have a list here of some of them, and I'm just going to go through them for a little while. If you want to pipe in at any time, you can. But it starts with Acadia, which is right at the top on Mount Desert Island. I remember that's the most eastern part of the country, and you see the first sunrise, and many people go there on New Year's Day to see the first sunrise of the year. And I remember going there, and it was very beautiful and sort of a lovely how the rocks came down to the ocean, and it's just a very unusual physical look in that part of the world. I liked it very much. Another area that I am crazy about is Utah. I'm sure you've been to Arches and Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Bryce Canyon. Those are national parks. And people, if you are looking for a perfect drive, you could spend your time at one of the parks or drive between them. And it's just one of the most exquisite areas of the country and of the world, I think. Each of them so different. Do you have a favorite?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Acadia. That is the last park I visited before everything hit this year. We visited Acadia last summer, and stayed there for about 2 weeks on a beautiful area just south of one of the bays, and it was just stunning. And I agree with you. Southern Utah is about the prettiest place you'll ever see.
It is. I think we're so lucky, and I hope people think about adding that to their bucket list, because I don't think there's anything more beautiful in the States. Speaking of beauty, I have to mention the blue water of Crater Lake. If anyone has seen that, is for some reason, I guess because it's in a crater of a volcano, the former volcano, it's so purely blue, and I remember that. Death Valley, another place where the colors, there's a place called Zabriski Point, and I think I went at dawn. I either went at dawn or sunset, but the colors when the sun hits the I guess they're hills, they're painted. And I think in this day of Instagramming, it's probably a very popular thing to do just for that. But I do remember it was very empty at the time I went there, and it was very stunning. Denali, that's another memory, because, very often in Alaska, it isn't clear. It's very cloudy, but it was perfectly clear the day we saw Denali, and everybody was very excited, including the guide. I don't know how long it had been since he had seen the whole mountain, but he was very, very excited that it was all there, and it's very beautiful. We also saw lots of moose, which I expected, but I was very pleased that we could see the entire mountain. There's a place, Dry Tortugas. Have you heard? You know about that?
I've been there.
You've been there. It's 99% underwater. That's very interesting. Yeah, it's fabulous. Where would you say? How would you pinpoint that as far as geographically?
Well, you have to want to get there, because you go to the end of Land's End in Key West, and that's your starting point. It's 90 miles off the coast of Key West, and you took at least I took a high-speed catamaran, which was tons of fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's a fort. It's a fort.
It's absolutely fun. And nearby is Everglades, which is near to where I live. And of course, you know about the alligators, but I think the birds of the Everglades are among the most wonderful collection you can find in the States, for sure. And it's a perfect place to see a sunset, because it reflects in the very shallow water with the grasses. It's, a big river. The Everglades is a river, correct?
One of my most memorable experiences was driving through Everglades after a rather dark and bleak business trip to Brazil. And I had some business in the Everglades as well. I got off the plane in Miami and drove down to the Everglades, and I was feeling kind of dark and moody, and it was early. It was an overnight flight, and it was early as I was driving the 38 miles to what was then Flamingo Lodge, which has since been destroyed in a hurricane. But the sun was coming up, and the birds were starting to sing. The bird life in the Everglades is abundant and rich and colorful, and it brightened my mood, and a national park can have that kind of effect on you. It took all of my bleak thoughts out of the equation and pumped me up and got me ready for the next bit of business that I had to do.
Yes, so many people come to Miami for the wildlife of Collins Avenue and South Beach, but I say the wildlife of the Everglades is a little bit more my speed. I agree with you. One of the places I went was the Gateway Arch National Park. That's a surprise. That's the beautiful arch, and it's a park, right? It's considered a national park.
I'm not sure if that's the designation, but it is a fabulous place to go, and with tremendous history. I took my kids there once.
Yeah, it's very different in terms of what we're talking about. The variety is much more than we realize. When you think of all the parks. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most popular one in the country. And, when I went there, I saw, loads of pancake places and a salt and pepper museum, all kinds of, folksy things. But the thing is, it's extraordinarily beautiful. There's a mist. It's called the Smoky Mountains for a reason. There's a kind of mist over the mountains. It's very beautiful and very accessible to many people who want to drive there. Let's see, Hawaii Volcanos National Park. I remember seeing lava sort of oozing around there. I was lucky once. It's built of lava, so it's sometimes active, and that's extraordinarily exciting. And let's see, Joshua tree. Now, I realized when I went there that they're fragile, but I didn't realize that Joshua trees aren't trees. They're bushes. They're not, they're considered bushes, but you can only find them in that area of the world. And what's also very unique, I think, are the boulders. You have a combination of these very odd looking trees or bushes and these wonderful boulders. It's a very surreal experience and very close to Las Vegas. So I think a lot of people who go there should try to think of, going off and seeing, this beautiful area. Let's see. Kenai Fjords. I'm pronouncing that right, I hope. That's where I flew over these fjords, and we landed and saw whole bunches of bears. Very few people, lots of bears. Very special if you can ever do that. And let's see, petrified forest in Arizona. Magnificent colors again. So many of these places are visually stunning, and you never forget them. You remember them when you're moody, as you said. You can go back and think of these things just as beautiful things. And let's see, Yosemite. So many people have been there. Did they still light the falls at night? I wonder. I heard they might have stopped doing that for safety. Yeah, but when I went there, they did that, and it was very, very special. We stayed at the lodge there and saw that. So these are just a few memories I have. I know you are such an expert at this. I would love to hear some of your tips and your stories about national parks.
I would love to share them. It's funny that you mentioned Great Smoky National Park, because one of my favorite all-time memories occurred there. I was driving to the east with my children from Colorado. And I have two grown kids, and we used to take them on road trips all the time, national park road trips. We made it to Great Smoky National Park, and we stopped at the visitor center, and I got a CD, as I often did. We would get the thematic CDs as we would drive through the national parks. And we were told that we probably wouldn't see any bears, even though there were abundant bears in the park. So we started driving. I was driving and started driving through the park. And my two teenage kids, Michael and Mariah, were with me. And Mariah is this extraordinary wildlife spotter. If there's something to see, she's going to spot it. So I'm driving along, and she yells, "Mom, I just saw a bear." So I quickly turned around and then pulled back to that side of the road. And we looked up into the shadows, and we could just barely make out Mama and two cubs. And so we decided to watch. And pretty soon, other cars stopped, as they do in a national park. If you're getting out, you've got your binoculars, they want to see what you're seeing. And eventually, the mama and two cubs came over the ridge and out of the shadows, so that they were very clear. And we watched from a safe distance, and car after car after car joined us in this moment. By the time we left, there were probably 100 cars that we had personally. My children still laugh about it. This is one of those family moments. We still laugh about it, that we personally started a bear jam, as you would call it.
Is that what it's called? A bear jam.
Almost 15 years later, we're still laughing.
Yeah, that happens sometimes when you go on a safari in Africa and you spot, one group spots something, and every Jeep and every vehicle from all around gets word of it, and it's the same thing. You've got 100 vehicles looking at whatever it is. That's great. So what else? What tips can you offer?
Well, when we decided that we would have this chat, I checked with my family, because many of my national park experiences were for business, but many were also with my family. My two now grown children, my husband and my parents, would often come out and join us for multi-generational experiences. My mom and dad live in Ohio, and they would come out and join us, and we'd go to a different section every year. So I asked them what were some of the things that they remembered from those years of exploring, and boy, everybody had an opinion on this. But one of the memories we all share is at Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. My husband Tom and I had to do some business, and my parents took the kids fishing on Jackson Lake, and my son Michael caught a trout, and he was very proud of it, and everybody was very excited. So we had the chef at Jackson Lake Lodge cook it up for dinner, and we all remember just how proud we all were of that. And it was just one of those family moments.
So you suggest as a multi-generational trip, it's just about the best, right?
If you can, it was, at least for my family, one way to establish shared memories, even if we're not that close together. How
about the idea of going off course, not staying on the main drag? What do you think? You go for that one?
I think that you have to find a balance between planning and wandering. And that if you can find that balance, you're going to certainly see and experience a national park with more knowledge. If you go out with a guide, I highly recommend guides. I recommend tours and activities. Yellowstone National Park, for example, has great tours like the cookout at Roosevelt Lodge, where you go out on a horse and you go to this remote area, and they have this cowboy dinner and entertainment, and it's this great experience, and you can learn about the park that way, or go out with on a tour. But then also wandering on your own, and I remember one time my daughter was working in Grand Canyon National Park, and my husband Tom and I went out to visit her. And we were going to go up to Lake Powell in northern Arizona and spend the night there. So we were driving up, and we hadn't really paid attention to the route. We passed a national park sign. It was clearly marked. It was for Wapatki National Monument, which is pueblos, as you'll see in Arizona. So we turned around and stopped and spent a good 2 hours poking around there, the three of us. We all loved it. And it was just one of those places that we never would have seen had we not been had we not been open to taking a different path or going off the route that we had planned.
Do you recommend getting reservations every night, or just at the beginning and the end, or how do you work that when you go to a national park?
If there is a place you definitely want to stay, like the Old Faithful Inn in Yellowstone National Park, it's a classic lodge, built in 1904. If you have the chance, you should stay there. But you're going to need to make some reservations in advance. However, you could leave open some other nights and just let yourself go on a whim. It depends on the time of year you're visiting. If you're going to visit in July, I think you should probably have plans for every night.
Right. I think shoulder seasons are the best times, spring and fall, when the crowds are fewer, you have animals birthing and that kind of thing. And if you can possibly do it, that's the best time, I think. How about challenging yourself? How do you challenge yourself physically when you go to these parks?
Well, I like to do that. It's what I think makes you feel good about yourself. When I turned 50 a few years ago, I gathered a group of friends and family, and we all trained for months, and we hiked down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and stayed at the historic Phantom Ranch for a couple of nights. I was very proud of myself for doing that. And I think we all were. We hiked back out, but we allowed ourselves, this is the wandering part, we allowed ourselves a day at the bottom of the canyon with no particular purpose. And we found ourselves exploring, finding backcountry waterfalls and soaking in a stream and just exploring the canyons and the hiking trails. And we even hiked a little ways up towards the North Rim. So those experiences, you couldn't plan them. And then we hiked back out, and we were very proud of ourselves, and we went directly to Altabar Hotel and had a fabulous dinner and celebrated.
Perfect. I think in these times, it's so wonderful to have the restorative ability when you go to a park like that to really breathe the fresh air and uncloud your mind. And I think it's more important than ever. And we're very lucky to have them. As in that regard, how about protecting and preserving the parks? What would you suggest? What are things we can do to honor these beautiful parks?
I've become almost militant about protecting. These parks belong to us. They are ours. We own them. And just as we would take care of our own house, these are our houses in nature. And it's incumbent on each and every one of us to do our part. And there are a lot of things you can do. I mean, you can certainly pick up a piece of trash if you see it. And my kids figured that one out, that mom and dad are pretty focused on that. If you see a piece of trash, pick it up. But you can also support the parks by with purchases in the visitor centers. We all have national park passports, which are these little blue books. And with every park you visit, you can get a stamp that shows the date that you visited in a different park. And after 25 years or more of exploring national parks, it all kind of runs together. So I had fun flipping through my national park passport and remembering who I was with and what my purpose was and where I went at a certain time. So,
do you take many photographs?
I do. I'm not a particularly good photographer, but I take lots and lots of photographs, and that's a good way to remember.
One of the nicest things is it doesn't change much. These parks are beautiful now. If you keep them beautiful, they were beautiful before. And the old lodges that you're talking about, even if you don't stay at them, you can go in and look at them, have a drink or a meal. They're worth seeking out as part of the beauty. What about leaving the crowds behind? We mentioned shoulder season. Are there any other suggestions? Because I know one of the problems of these gorgeous parks is everyone wants to go, and that's wonderful. But is there a way to avoid crowds that you suggest?
Absolutely. It's not that hard, even in a park like Yellowstone, which is huge, but only a small percentage of that park is actually developed, meaning it has a structure on it or a road or something like that. But there are plenty of trails. So avoid the crowds. I would never go see Old Faithful Geyser, for example, erupt. It erupts roughly every 90 minutes. When you don't really want to go between 10 and 2, that's when the crowds are there. I've seen Old Faithful Geyser erupt at midnight.
Oh my! In the moonlight. Oh my!
With very, very few people. So you can avoid the crowds even in these fairly touristy areas by going at a different time. But it's also really fairly easy. Even if you have mobility issues, just to walk away from the crowds. If everybody's at this particular viewpoint, go to a different one.
Good idea.
Or go at a different time. And you mentioned the shoulder seasons. Absolutely. Death Valley National Park. This is a wonderful time to visit right now, but you have to really like the heat if you're going to visit in the summer. So, right. And Death Valley is a spectacular national park, just with so much to offer.
And other places that are kind of let's say like Glacier Park, maybe they'd have fewer people there. And it's also very wild and beautiful. Maybe you can seek out parks that are perhaps not as popular if you think about it, if that bothers you, if crowds bother you, because it's a wonderful thing that we love our parks. And but one of the joys is the solitude and the quiet. If we can mix both of them, if we can find gorgeous parks that have space and, you can have your own chance to think and dream and sit and all that without hearing crowds, it's perfect. How about some of the lesser known national parks in that vein? What would you recommend?
Absolutely. You can see the ruins at Mesa Verde in southwestern Colorado, and they're pretty spectacular, and I recommend that park for everybody. But in the summer season, it gets a little crowded. you can instead go to Canyon de Chelly National Monument in northeastern Arizona, which is now operated by the Navajo Nation in partnership with the National Park Service. And well, it has been for a while, but you go into that canyon, you're going to see ruins equally spectacular, all by yourself or practically by yourself. In that case, you have to go into the park with a Navajo guide, which in and of itself is a great way to travel because they're going to tell you from their perspective what you're seeing.
What about some of the eastern parks? And we've talked a lot about western parks. I know one that you're very familiar with, Gauley River National Recreation Area. Tell me about that.
I'm so excited. The new river, National River, was named a national park and preserve in December. This is in southern West Virginia, which has become a region that I have just grown to love. I grew up in Ohio, near Cuyahoga Valley National Park, as a matter of fact. But I never really ventured to West Virginia as often as I clearly should have. The New River is one of the oldest rivers in the world. And like many national parks, it brings multiple dimensions. You have to, an area has to, in order to be named a national park, there have to be several different reasons. They have to have natural resources, fabulous human history, other reasons to name it a national park. And the New River absolutely brings all that to the table. Nearby is the Gauley River National Recreation Area. So and that's where rafters, this is an adventure mecca. Rafters come from all over the world to raft the Gauley in the New River.
I did that many years ago, and it was great. It was really great. Yeah, I didn't realize it was so great and so close at the time, because on the eastern side, you don't think, the eastern part of our country has some wonderful rivers, but we don't always hear about them, and one of them is the Gauley and the New River that you can do it as well. Harper's Ferry is there too, nearby in West Virginia. That's a great one.
I saw that for the first time just a couple of years ago, and I could have spent days just exploring that area.
Well, this is very interesting. All of it is interesting. There are so many parks and not enough time, but I ask everybody at the end of our talk to just remember the most memorable, or one of the most memorable experiences you've had to share with us. Can you share one with us about national parks?
I can, and it's in our first national park, Yellowstone. Not a few years ago, I was traveling with a group of people, and we were with a guide. And we had spent the morning spotting wildlife in Lamar Valley, which is the northern region of that national park. It's we often call it the American Serengeti, because it's so rich and full of wildlife. And we'd had a pretty successful morning of wildlife spotting, and we were on our way back to Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel for lunch, and driving along, and we were all kind of quiet. The guide suddenly changed directions and turned into a pull-off on the opposite side of the road. She instructed all of us to be quiet. She said she had spotted a fox that was on a hill, and it suddenly bolted. So we just sat there, not really knowing what we were about to see. And within a minute, 3 full-grown wolves raced over the ridge, through the trees, and down into a gully right below the road, and started feeding on a carcass that we couldn't see until we started looking very closely at it. And then these 3 wolves, it was an up close experience. They weren't very far away, and we could see them very, very clearly. And then they started playing, romping like dogs do. And then the sun was out, and then they started kind of sunning themselves on the ridge. Then one wolf sat up and started howling.
Wow.
And within just a moment or two, he was answered by wolves on the opposite side of the road. So another pack had heard his call. And this went on for a few moments, but it was raw and wild And it reminded me that we almost lost these wolves. They were almost gone. We killed them to the point of extinction, but we brought them back. We had the foresight as humans who own these national parks. These are our parks. We had the foresight to remedy that, and we were successful. And I don't know that we all have enough of those wild, raw experiences in our lives. National parks can often bring those to us. So I think I was reminded and kind of recommitted to helping to preserve and protect national parks anytime I can, but also reminded that it is our job to make sure that the next generation of Mesereaus and the next generation of Lanes will have that same opportunity to see and hear that.
Thank you. That's absolutely true and absolutely beautiful. We really feel your passion, and we've learned a lot as well. So thank you very much, Mona. And I hope to see many more national parks. I hope we all get to do that.
Indeed.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And remember, if you have questions or comments on this episode or any episodes, go to my website, placesirememberlealane.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our award-winning podcast. We've recorded over 100 episodes of Places I Remember, so follow us on any podcast app. And new monthly episodes are also on YouTube with gorgeous video. My book, Places I Remember, is available in print and Kindle, and I read the audio version. Follow my travel writing at Forbes.com. Contact me at the links in the show notes or on my website, placesirememberlealane.com, and keep making your own travel memories.